Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Shit Take. Today we'll be talking about in our opinion, the top 10 horror movies of all time. We're going over them individually, and just giving a little bit of information on why we think so, whether it's specific a character's performance stood out, what it maybe have done for the genre as a whole, or maybe just scared the bejesus out of us, and we just wanted to share that with you. As always, I'm Arrow for the win, and my partner in crime.
Stellaby. You might see that we made some changes to the streams. If you over to your right side, you'll see we have a sub goal now. Once we actually hit our sub goal, we'll be giving away a gift to our subscribers. Please make sure you're subscribed if you'd like to be in the running.
As always, feel free to sound off in the comments. Let us know. We appreciate your feedback. We welcome it.
All right, so let's get started.
Number 10, Silence of the Lambs. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, Silence of the Lambs is the second film in the Hannibal Lecter saga, starring Anthony Hopkins and Jodie Foster. And, what is often lauded as some of the best performances of their career, both of which received Oscars for the performances and Best Actress and Best Leading Actress. Um, yeah, so, I mean, maybe if you're not familiar with the movie, you've probably heard the phrases before, it puts the lotion on its skin or else it gets the hose again, that sort of thing. This is really just a look into the psychological horror of Hannibal Lecter while he's captured and giving information to Agent Starling's character,
Yeah,
Jodie Foster, as they're searching for a serial killer, Buffalo Bill,
yeah,
and he is just like, it's just a very creepy sort of like maniacal, like gears turning, and a lot of people see Anthony Hopkins' performances as really just bringing this character to life and just sticking himself in the forefront of this movie. And often a lot of what he was doing while the filming was improv and ad lib, but it just really created this really not like a sick and twisted, but often he was a genius. Hannibal Lecter.
yeah.
He was very intelligent.
And yeah, a lot of people like to kind of talk about how this movie is not realistic and that they wouldn't rely on a killer like that. But if you know anything about the FBI behavioral unit back in the 70s, they actually were doing a lot of investigations, interviews with killers who are currently in prison, multiple killers, and they were trying to get inside the head of serial killers. So I mean, it's not really that off base, and again, it takes place in the realm of the real world. So that's another reason why a lot of people always found this one quite horrifying, because it's possible.
Exactly. You build that criminal, that psychological profile, and it's just like, oh well, if they're following these steps, if they're the methodology to it all, it really just, it becomes applicable in those real life situations.
Yeah. At number 9, we have 28 Days Later, a super minimalistic movie. Could have been shot just with a camera and a small crew. Movie's about Cillian Murphy's character. He wakes up in a hospital. It's been a little bit of time. People have gone crazy. There's been a mutation of what's, I think, the rabies virus in the actual movie itself, and it spreads to the human populace, and shit goes crazy. And so the movie really takes place just kind of chronicling his survival along with the small group of people that he ends up meeting along the way. And then, of course, the human element comes into play at the end, how dangerous the humans could potentially be in the case as well. So, I mean, it goes over all of it, but it's respectful to each throughout. And I think that's, what makes this movie so good.
Exactly. It puts you in that sort of mindset of, oh, okay, like if this were to happen today or tomorrow, with everything going on, especially now with, pandemics and stuff like that, it really that far off to something that could be, twisted or mutated to put you in that scenario. Like, what would you do? How much time do you think you'd survive, especially in a situation like that? And I think that it does a very good job of leading the characters through that path and saying, okay, like, these are the steps that we have to do to ensure our own survival. And society has literally collapsed around us.
Yeah. There's also a sequel to the movie. I don't think it's as good as 28 Days Later, but 28 Weeks Later as well. It's a good movie. But I would check it out for sure.
There was even talks of a third movie, but that's development. Sometimes they materialize, sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
But who's to know? Coming in at number 8 is the Evil Dead 2. which is the second of the original trilogy in Sam Raimi's Evil Dead saga, and just starring the ever charismatic and likable actor Bruce Campbell doing what he does best, kicking ass with his chainsaw arm and his boomstick against the never-ending war of the Deadites.
For sure.
His struggle with the Necromonicon.
Yeah, Bruce Campbell, I'm one of those firm believers that he could have done anything in his life. He's got the rugged good looks. He's got the charismatic personality. He's got the goofiness. He's a really handsome guy. I mean, to me personally, I put him like in the same category as like George Clooney and Cary Grant, how they just kind of have it all, you know? And if he wanted to, I truly believe he could have just been the biggest star of his entire generation. But movie's a whole lot of him. So if you're a big fan of Bruce Campbell, you're going to love Evil Dead 2.
Yeah, and it was really a turning point for the franchise as well. Starting to blend in that comedy, without a way that didn't take away from the horror. And
Yeah,
I think that that's something a lot of movies have struggled to emulate in recent time, because everyone wants to just make this terrifying as humanly possible. But
yeah,
this was like, no, these are real stakes. This is real like conflict that's happening with those movies, but it is still lighthearted goofiness enough that Ash's character is, combined with that snarky and the catchphrases to really make the films enjoyable.
absolutely. At number 7, we have Dawn of the Dead, the original. Um, I think the movie actually does such an extremely good job of the lead up. Right, the movie starts right after Night of the Living Dead, and it's just in a radio broadcast booth. Everybody's panicking. They're trying to figure out what's going on, and all the while, everybody's trying to figure out some kind of game plan as to where they're going to go, how they're going to survive. And immediately after that, the main group of people, they get in the helicopter, take off. They end up finding this mall, and they hole up there. And the movie does such an amazing job for like the first hour and 15 minutes of making you feel like, man, this is probably how it would go. Sure, there's some silly elements as well. Nothing that like puts the movie off or anything, but for the most part, it does such a good job of really portraying that realistic feeling of it all.
It's another one of those, like, okay, where would you go in this situation? Like, would you head for the water, or would you head for a location that could be easily fortified, like a mall? Usually, those are the type of things, the cage doors on there. It's usually steel or something like that. Like,
Yeah,
it would make sense realistically to try and hold up in some place like that, at least for the foreseeable future, if you weren't sure what to do. Almost every major city has them all, so it just makes sense.
yeah,
It puts you in that mindset. This is what I have to do to survive. I think it's good, and just how much came from that movie to influence later zombie films. I think that just easily puts it
yeah.
at number 7 on the list.
Yeah, the remake also is really, really cool for a different kind of reason, but this one still holds up.
All right, coming in number 6 is Scream. So this is basically just a movie that reignited, I think, the passion and popularity of the slasher film genre. In the 70s and 80s, going
Yeah,
into that, you have a lot of, your Freddy, your Michael Myers, your Jason sort of thing. But after a while, that whole supernatural element kind of like falters, I think, in a way. It's less like, okay, like we get it, like don't go to the haunted camp, don't go to this, don't go to that. And then, they even portray the movie in almost a satirical way in Scream by saying like there's rules to these horror movies. This is what you do, this is what you don't, and this is how you survive in them. It's basically not only speaking to the cast of characters within the film, but it's also speaking to you as the audience. It almost makes you part of that experience. But
yeah.
what happens when killer isn't some ghost, isn't some zombie, but it's the guy that you're spending math class with? You know what I mean? It, to me, it was brilliant.
Oh yeah,
That was Wes Craven like at his finest.
for sure. I honestly, I say it all the time, right? Like I think Scream is a truly better movie than any of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. Don't get me wrong, right? Like I love Freddy just as much as anybody else, but it's all about delivery. Number 5 on our list is Psycho. If you've never seen the original Psycho, it's a truly fabulous movie. if you've heard about this movie your entire life, right, and you finally end up watching it, you might be confused for like the first 10, 15 minutes of the movie because you're just following along this girl who just stole a bunch of money and is trying to flee from her job, right? And then of course she ends up at Bates Motel. If you haven't seen this movie, please give it a watch because even now you can go back and watch this movie, and it was done by Alfred Hitchcock, and you can see the quality of acting start to change. A lot of the times when you watch a lot of those old movies, there's like a certain style to the acting, right? There's certain elements to the way they act that just kind of seem very classical, right? And then in the 70s, in the 60s and 70s, you start to see this shift, and you can literally see it on screen. There's, the one person's acting almost in that classical sense, and then of course you have Bates who's acting in an absolutely more realistic, more modern sense. For me personally, like it's such a good bridge between old and new, and man, it's just such a good movie. And it's still
It's
scary too. Like even as an adult watching it, you just kind of get creeped out at certain elements.
there's this yeah there like you said, there's a specific part of that movie where you would just see a complete tonal shift. You're just like, oh, okay, like kind of like puts you in that uneasy position, and then
Oh
by the
yeah,
end of the movie, you're like, oh my god, like really is just something that has stood the test of time, not only for the horror genre but filmmaking in general
oh
through
yeah,
Alfred Hitchcock's like lens. And I guarantee you, like some of the popular horror movies that have come after would have found truly inspiration from this movie.
absolutely.
Number four is a film that is very dear to his heart, so I'm gonna let him take the reins on that.
Number 4 is The Thing, not the original, the remake, John Carpenter's. If you've seen the original and you're one of those who just cannot accept that a remake could possibly be better than the original, well, you're wrong. John Carpenter's The Thing it's movie magic, and not a single bit of it is like CGI, except for the alien ship landing at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah, just the lights and sounds of all that.
It's the absolute standard when it comes to special effects that
Cool
aren't
effects. Yeah.
CGI, and it's still the standard today, 40 years later. You will not find a movie that has better practical effects in it. I assure you that. There are scenes where there's heads with no bodies, opening mouths and tongues wiggling around. You're not going to get any better. For me, it's my personal favorite. I don't
A
recognize
lot
it
of
as the
body
best ever
horror.
for sure, but it's my personal favorite. And if you haven't seen it, you're truly missing out on one of the best movies ever made.
If this was released like today and it didn't win like some sort of
Oh my god, dude!
effect for like costuming or special effects or something, that's just ridiculous. Because yeah, no, it's a lot of body horror, like you said. There's a lot of practical effects and stuff like that. But the fact that the science fiction horror movie isn't put it higher on more lists, especially what like came afterwards, man. Like this is something
Dude,
that it followed its own rules for what a monster was. It followed like ways to discover it, and it leaves you with such a to the sense like edge of your seat feeling by the end of the movie. Like you're just like, well, what was real, what wasn't, like
yeah.
who to trust. And that's
They
what it comes down to.
and even at the end of the movie, right? You're left with two options. Like, I mean, there's left with like millions of different options. Like, is this or isn't that? Or is this person? Um, Science
Become
team,
pawns and
exactly. A science team discovers this alien in the ice that was, crash landed 100,000 years ago, and then immediately following that, there are issues. If you know what I mean. I don't want to spoil it. I want everybody in the world to see this movie.
yeah, I mean, you got Keith David, Wilford Brimley. Like it's got some good
Oh
actors in
yeah.
there, for that alone.
There's
But
absolutely no romantic. Um, there's no romantic like subplot. It's
yeah,
the
it's
whole movie
this
begins
is the movie.
and
Yeah,
immediately there is a storyline, and it's constant throughout, and it's like there's no like slowing of the pace. It's only slowly steadily progressing higher. There's this constant throbbing on a bass guitar apparently, and it's just like the whole movie it's like this one song, right? Because there's not a lot of music in the movie. It's just
yeah.
this one note that's bump bump. Just this whole movie is just this one note, bump bump. It's like a heartbeat, and you're just constantly reminding throughout the whole movie that some shit wrong, right?
Yeah, and I think that the fact that that is done, just it helps encapsulate the movie's overall like theme, with like trust and the unknown, and simulating the heartbeat is definitely something that I think help spread that message if
Yeah,
you're trying to portray that in a film. There's been so many shows and like cartoons, movies, whatever that have like emulated that scene,
yeah,
and it's just so funny because there's that episode of South Park with about the lice where they're trying to figure out who has the
yeah.
lice, so they do that test. It's just like, well, 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 look what we have here, Kyle. Look what he's like, well, that wouldn't do anything. He's like, what? He's like, the whole point of this test was to see who the alien was. He's like, oh, what do you mean? He's like, you just wasted all our time for nothing, you idiot. Like, it's just the stupidest thing. Like, he went through all this trouble testing their blood, and it's not going to tell them who has lice. It's ridiculous. It's just, oh my God.
Fucking South Park.
Number three is The Exorcist. And I mean, this is just another one of those things. Like, if you haven't seen it, watch it because there's just so much that goes into this movie that is still being done today. Any sort of
Oh yeah,
like how many exorcism movies can you just count on the top of your head, dude? Like everything that came
there's
after this, man.
hundreds.
Yeah, the
That's not an
original one.
exaggeration. There are hundreds of exorcism movies.
Yeah, the original one just shows why it is. It has that as the theme music that's playing the overall like just
Yeah,
the nature of this movie. Like what would happen if someone was going through demonic possession. They needed priest to try and attempt to exorcise this demon, and for what it happens in that movie to just completely tear apart like not only the life of the girl, the family they're dealing with, but like the priest himself,
yeah,
having that crisis of faith and everything, and ultimately how it ends, and just shows that sort of
for sure.
what's
Yeah,
the word, yeah, like it's the word, like I don't want to say futility of it all, but like just
it's true though.
how would you deal with that yeah, like, how do you deal with that
How would
situation, you
anybody
know what I mean?
really deal with that situation? You know,
Exactly.
like there's no one that could even tell you. There's no priest that could tell you how there's really going to be dealt with that situation. Because one, right? Like if you believe that thing, cool. But if it does ever happen, who the fuck alive has actually done it? Who the fuck alive has actually battled a goddamn demon?
And would like I live to tell the tale. Yeah, like if you vanquish that foe, more times to you. But like I feel like that's if that's something that you're going with, it's like
Yeah.
probably at the cost of their life, vanquish that foe. You know what I mean?
This movie, when it came out, people left the theaters sick. They
Yeah,
vomiting. It was awful, right? And I mean, if you really think about it, right? If you've seen the movie, yeah, it's pretty adult for sure. But then you have to think, man, it came out in the '70s,
mm.
and for that time, it was really adult. You know, like
Yeah. Like for it to get past the MPAA and all that with what was
mhm,
director's cut or not, but like yeah, like that's the type of stuff that like oh well. I don't think they could have made that today, or oh man, this wouldn't have flown. It's like
yeah. I mean, even
scrutiny
back
of the
then,
lens.
like it's pretty goddamn touchy material for sure. And
Yeah,
and
that's
it
like
holds
50
up.
years ago.
It holds up. In
Exactly. Oh,
preparation for all these
definitely.
movies, we watched every one of them 100%. And we just want to make sure that the picks we were making were legitimate, and we still feel that way about them. But this is one of those ones that while watching, I just kind of sat there and it just reminded me, like man, I watched this as a kid, and it's still eerie. It's still hard to watch in some ways for sure.
Exactly. I mean, especially if you're watching and like you have like, a younger sibling or a child or something like that, and you're watching it's like, man, like how do you put yourself in that scenario, which is like, oh, my daughter, my son, my brother, my sister
Yeah,
is there's somebody in that body, like, and that's just insane. Okay, so here we are. Rounding out number two is Alien, and I think that this is one of the best sort of movies period, but strictly from the horror genre, just drives the paranoia, the close quarters up to
yeah,
like 1,000%. And I this is my favorite horror movie of all time. And I think not only is it held up, but like everything that has come after it, good or bad, ultimately just fails to capture what this movie was. And I mean, I saw like an IMAX a few months ago, and it was just like felt like just like this unease the entire time
yeah.
from first egg opening to the face hugger. And if you haven't seen this movie by now, check it out. But there is like I
It's a
don't know,
good
like 10
cast too. You
movies
got
now in this
John
franchise.
Hurt, Ian
Oh my god,
Holm.
the cast, Ian
Mm-hmm.
Holmes, Sigourney Weaver, like it's just ridiculous. And it's one of those movies that does so well with the minimalistic cast and just, Ridley Scott. This was before James Cameron took over, but like Ridley Scott was just like putting you in that position of like, okay, like there is something completely out of the ordinary here. This is something that these science officers have found at, you know, the life form. It bursts out, it grows at an exponential rate, and now it is like literally stalking you, hunting you, or of a lesser life form of this being that is now like, climbing through the ventilation shafts of this
Yeah.
spaceship. You're like, okay, like how do we get this out? Because we know we're trying to go back to Earth, we're trying to go back to the space station, and Sigourney Weaver was a completely unlikely hero in that movie because she's not for the time she's not a superhero, she's not a badass gun wielding super soldier or anything like that. Like she's a science officer. Like she's looking at this, she knows exactly what she's dealing with,
Yeah.
confines of what she knows, but yet she's put in the position like where she quickly becomes like the only thing standing between
She
this.
had to persevere. Otherwise, she's going to die.
Exactly. And there's that scene where she's like there in the vents and just like she's like trying to find it. They have a tracker on it. They're like, oh, they're just coming around the corner, and you just see it like crawling through the
Mm-hmm.
vents, and it's just like, oh my god, like you feel like so claustrophobic. You're like, you only have like one way to go, and it's just crazy.
Yeah, my favorite
And
my favorite scene of the movie itself was whenever they actually first found the ship, the distress beacon. Like, man, just the set itself looked so cool. Of course, watching Prometheus,
mm,
you get all that today, but it's easier today. It's so much easier today. We know
exactly,
so much more
yeah,
about special effects and about practical effects that it just makes it so much easier. But back then, that was such a really fucking cool set to see, especially going back and watching it. Because man, even back then, like really, he just had such a good idea, like such a good eye for the movie itself. And the truth is, we had a hard time picking between this and our number one. Um, but yeah,
yeah. No, it's crazy. Like the cinematography, the special effects, like the suit, the costuming. Like when you first see that adult xenomorph, like oh my god, does
yeah,
it make your skin crawl? And she's there, against like the wall as it opens its mouth and the second mouth comes out. Like that's an iconic
and it
scene for
stands
any
up.
movie. Like
Like
yes,
it
like
stands
you
up. That's
recognize
it's
that.
like
Like
the same model today, right? I mean, they have, or at least it
exactly,
hasn't
yeah,
changed much. Like,
yeah, yeah. Like when you see a xenomorph, you recognize it. Like you
yeah.
know that it's from. Like you probably don't even know it's called a xenomorph, but you're like, oh, that's the alien. Like
Usually
that's what
shit changes. Like if you look at Pumpkinhead, like he's made several changes over the years, but not the
yeah.
Xenomorph. They look the fucking same. And that just goes to show you
Just
that they hold up. They're fucking scary.
yeah, exactly. That is a threatening figure.
And at number one, we have The Shining. Um,
It's
again, we watched all these movies in preparation. Of all the movies we watched, the one that made me feel the most distress was definitely this movie. The Shining. It just for me, it does such a good job of making the most out of just the smallest of casts. You're looking at one person, Jack Nicholson, honestly, really carrying the role, but that's not. I can't really say that, because they all did their part for sure. The kid was absolutely fantastic. Like, it's really hard to find a child actor who's going to perform their role the way that kid
yeah.
performed his role. You know?
Especially under Stanley Kubrick. The man was a genius of filmmaking, but
Yeah,
he was a totalitarian. Like there was no highway. It was just his way.
for sure.
And that man, like oh
And you're acting alongside with Jack Nicholson. I mean, come on, Jack Nicholson, like in the absolute prime of his life, you know, coming off some of the best roles he'll ever play in his life, i.e., One Flew Over
exactly.
the Cuckoo's Nest.
Absolutely.
Like you can't watch this movie and really not be distressed. And it's not like there's no jump scares really in the movie. It's mostly psychological, right? Like most of the horror that you're going to experience is going to be in your own mind. And I personally feel like that's the best kind of horror. Like, don't scare me with what I'm looking at. Scare me with how I'm going to feel
Exactly,
after the
which you
movie.
don't
You
know.
know, I'm not gonna walk down the hallway and think like, oh shit, what's behind this corner? Not a jump scare
Like,
sense, but like,
no.
because that's just startling, and that's fucking cheap scares.
It's at its core. It's an isolationist film. Is a family snowed in at a hotel. They're the only ones there. It's just completely within their own
Yeah,
realm of paranoia and fear. You are making this stuff happen. Not that there's not a supernatural component, because there definitely is. But it's just like, what can you do when you're just trapped with these people and nobody else? Like, you're snowed in. You can't go outside.
yeah,
And if you do, you risk, freezing to death.
and you don't know it's
And
you don't know you're trapped. Like you
exactly,
don't know
like
you're
you're
trapped.
you're
It's just
you're s- you're
it's just panic and not even
that's
panic,
what's gonna
right?
set in. But that's exactly what would set in real life. Like, you go like, oh, there's an empty hallway. I gotta be the only person here.
Yeah.
What happens if you're not? What happens if you have the thought that you're not? What if you think someone's watching? What if you think somebody's there? What if you think you hear a voice? What if you see something? Like, it's the strangest influence on, like, yes, the world itself, but also,
Yeah.
types of, I don't want to say cabin fever style movies, but it's just like, you have that minimalistic cast, don't even need a specific type of, like, horror element or creature of the night. Everything, like you said, is happening within their own minds.
And that's the thing, right? Like if you watch the movie, you'll know what we're talking about, right? Like there's almost a sense, right, after the movie is done and over with, that they were never trapped. I mean, no one really dies except for the main character and one other. So
Mhm.
it's not like there's a ton of death and gore in the movie itself. Um, and that's what I mean, right? No one was actually trapped in this place. They could have left freely at any time, except for the fact that through supposed cabin fever, right? Because they warning at the beginning of the movie by the actual owners themselves. They're saying, just be careful. The last guy, who stayed went a little crazy, killed his entire family. So they go in there with
Thanks
that
for the warning.
idea of, well, it's just cabin fever. Don't worry about it. And then it's not. It's so much more. And they think they're trapped, right? Or at least the main character, Jack Nicholson's character, thinks he's trapped, but he's not trapped. At any point, he just left if he wanted to. And it's not like there was this like presence that was wanting to harm them. Or I mean, yes, they were trying to harm them, but like they weren't physically harming them. They were doing
Yeah.
it all through Jack Nicholson's character. So I don't know. It's a weird one, and it's just one of those movies that even after it's still over with, you still just kind of think about it like would you be
What?
able
Yeah.
to
What could you have done?
understand? Would you have been able to interpret what's happening to you as something beyond, or would you understand? Oh shit, this is not cabin fever. This is something else. Or would you think like, oh, is it just cabin fever? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, that's nothing to say against, like, the movie itself, because it is iconic. Like, I
For
mean,
sure.
Red Rum, all work and no play. Like, the twins. Like, you've seen that hallway, the little boy on the tricycle.
Yeah,
Like, so much of this movie, even if you haven't seen it, it
it's in
stands out to
everything.
you, like, oh, I've seen this before. I've seen the parodies or the inspiration.
Yeah,
It's just one of those movies, again. Like, it just stands the test of time,
yeah,
and I think that its relevance is not nearly as it'll never be forgotten. You know what I mean?
absolutely. That's our picks for top 10 horror movies of all
Top
time.
10.
If you have any other thoughts, any movies you think we missed or we should have added to the list, you can go fuck yourself. Um,
Give us the criticism, man. Like, maybe none of these movies did it for you. Maybe one of them did it for you. Maybe your top 10 just blows us out of the water. We want to hear from you guys. So, hopefully you guys have enjoyed this video, and, as always, remember to, like, comment, subscribe, spread the word. We want to hear back from you guys. Sound off in the comments below. We'll have our social medias on there, the Discord, the Twitter, our Facebook, Instagram, all that.
and make sure that if you are wanting to be included for the giveaway, once we hit our sub goal, please just make sure and subscribe. All right, y'all. We'll see you next time.